Hello, it is Andrea from Chronic Matters here again. Same t-shirt, same pajama pants, same puppy. I figured that might be the case. New drink. I made myself a smoothie. Although, of course, I still have my trusty Yeti bottle full of water that I'm supposed to drink because of the pots. If you were watching my last video, which maybe you do not want to watch 2 videos in a day, and I understand that. These get quite long because if you are anything like me and deal with chronic illness, then there's just a lot of information to cover. There's a lot of topics. Your medical history is probably very, very complex, and much like going in and speaking to every new doctor or nurse and starting from the beginning and telling your story over and over again, that's kind of like what it's like here. And so I would imagine the vast majority of my videos will probably have a decent duration. The video that I want to make right now is about actionable steps that you can take to cope with where you're at in your chronic illness. And that could be any kind of chronic illness. I have multiple chronic illnesses. I have been chronically ill my entire life, pretty much that I can remember. Like I remember going to Las Vegas when I was 19 and not being able to walk the way that everybody else could, and having to find ways to be in Las Vegas as a person who struggles with health issues on a daily basis. So I'm obviously no longer 19, and my life has moved forward and grown an awful lot since then. And I have done and lived an awful lot since I was 19, and really started to notice that things that were easier for other people weren't necessarily as easy for me. Oftentimes, well, especially with the growth of social media, if you're around my age, you were, on this planet before the internet existed, before social media existed. You were probably one of the first people to hear about Facebook, all of that. So, but whatever demographic you are, welcome to my channel. And I hope that I can be somebody who can give you hope, maybe some practical application tips for living with chronic illness. Yeah, so under light of chronic illness, there's many facets. Where I'm currently at is not where I was a year ago. I have tiptoed around the subject that a good chunk of my chronic illness has been the result of long-standing illness that a lot of people fight since 2020. And I'm right here along with you, suffering now, not in silence. But I did suffer in silence for a long time. So when I first got really, really sick, I was unable to do almost anything. I kind of spoke in the POTS video about not being able to even ambulate to the bathroom. So what I'm talking about and the tips and the tricks are really going to be age and stage of where you're at in your illness process, because I went to registered nursing university courses while I was already chronically ill. So I have, an experience of doing an entire nursing program while chronically ill, and how I managed to survive those days is vastly different than how I managed to survive the early days of my infection with the virus. And So my tips and tricks are really take them with a grain of salt. They're not here to make you feel like if you can't do them today, that you can't do them ever. Maybe just something to keep in the back of your mind as a goal, perhaps. With chronic illness, it tends to ebb and flow. You're going to have days where, you can do more. Although I caution you, depending on your illness, with pushing your limits, because you may already know this, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. So I pay for a lot of the things that I choose to do in my body, but I go into it knowing what I'm choosing and how I'm picking what I'm going to do with my time. And I think that is the most important point that I have learned over the number of years with chronic illness, is to know what price I'm going to need to pay to do whatever activity it is that I need to do or want to do, and how to plan around that. And then practicing giving myself grace when I cannot meet my expectations of myself. And I think a lot of chronic illness, now I know a lot of people on the internet who have family who is not supportive, who refuses to educate themselves on chronic illness or your illness or whatever it might be that you're fighting. However, I think for a lot of people who have chronic illness in general, the vast majority of our mental health problems come from an internal milieu as opposed to an external milieu, and are only generally affected by the outside world when they enter into our internal milieu and start playing around with the way that we see ourselves, how we value ourselves, and the type of condition that we have and what we're dealing with. So people can devalue you or devalue your condition from many different avenues, but you have to be able to protect your internal milieu for your mental health. And I'm coming at this from somebody who is not going to stand on a high horse. I have CPTSD. So that basically just means that I have PTSD, but I have it from multiple sources across my lifespan, and it bites me in the butt. I have an anxiety disorder. So I have generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. And then I have at times dealt with depression, although I don't think depression is my normal go-to. It's not something that my body slips into without having provocation of something else. So it's not like a single disease entity that I manage all the time, but I can tell you that there have been times where I have been depressed. So there are going to be days where literally the most simple activity is going to be incredibly difficult and may not happen that day. And so I'm talking from a more generalized perspective. When I first started suffering with chronic illness, I tried to ignore it. And I tried to actually, I think a lot of people with chronic illness can relate to this. The stigma of the world surrounding chronic illness is that a lot of us are faking it because we want social benefits of some kind, right? Like I live in Canada, I'm supported through long-term disability at this point, and that we are faking the severity for our own benefit. But in fact, I would argue that the vast majority of people with chronic illness are faking being well. And so I was doing that for years and years and years. I have osteitis pubis. It's one of the things that I suffer with. It is debilitatingly painful. it's only recently been diagnosed, and I haven't discussed it on this channel in any form of detail yet, but it interferes with my ability to walk and my activities of daily living. And I have always gotten to the point of when I can take no more steps, I mean no more steps, not 1, not 2, not 5, not to the car, not down the street, none. And I, large in part, put myself in that situation. And without going into too much detail and deviating off on a subject I haven't covered for myself on this channel yet, I have to use mobility aids. But for everybody around me, these mobility aids that I use are new and sudden, and I have to explain it, and they're confused, and I didn't break my back and, have like a traumatic injury that happened overnight that precipitated myself being wheelchair bound, right? And one of the best things I did for my healing was allow myself to stop pretending to be well, to stop getting on that ride and, faking it until I make it. And I had to do that for a long time, and I did do it for a long time. And ultimately, that was not what was best for me as a chronic illness person. And I am just coming at 37 years old to realize that I need to stop living my life for other people and what other people value out of me, because then I give every little bit of me away to other people. And I really needed to take that back. This toilet paper condition that got all of us in a tizzy basically took me back to the bed. And I got stuck there for months, just basically staring out the window, just because it was that difficult to mobilize. So my resources for mental health and healing and, my tips and tricks that I used during that time to stay living on this planet were different than what I use today to stay living on this planet. Because living with chronic illness, especially if you have a few of them that tack together, and honestly, maybe it's just the nurse in me that I, worked with a geriatric population, and like over life, we just generally keep tacking, more letters behind our name in terms of the conditions that we have. But, unless you're super lucky, a lot of us don't have just like one chronic condition. Those of us who are chronically ill have multiple. And so we need to keep in the back of our mind how we're going to manage in all the different stages of our healing process. And sometimes that means you need to have resources at your bed, not in your kitchen, not in your living room, nowhere else in the house. You're going to need to be able to manage to live in your bed and maintain your mental health to the best of your ability. And that, I'm not going to say that's easy. This is incredibly difficult. So some of the things that I did right at the beginning, my comprehension was a real struggle. The symptoms that I had mimicked a few symptoms that you would get in dementia. And so my comprehension, my understanding, it was so frustrating. But I learned very quickly that I was unable to read. So if I'm unable to read, that nixes quite a few activities that I could do. So I personally like to paint, and I could kind of tolerate painting, but I would beat myself up if I could only paint something, say, really, really small. So, I decided that I was going to buy smaller paper, for example, so that, finishing a subject or finishing painting something, because that's something I could do in bed with like a lap table, would make me feel encouraged as opposed to discouraged. So I like watercolor painting, for example, and I would do, I don't know if it's like 5x7 or something, for fairly small pieces of paper that I would cut in half and turn into bookmarks, because that is all I could do. But there were days where I would have severe migraines, because I suffer migraines as well, and it did not get better in this last year. It only got worse. So, you know, those were not painting days. That's not when I would elicit you know, art supplies for myself to be in bed with. Those are days where perhaps all the lights would be off in the room, the blackout blinds. If you don't have blackout blinds and you have chronic illness, invest in them. They're not that expensive on Amazon. So blackout blinds were super important, because that meant I could sleep day or night, nap day or night, and take out stimulus day or night. And so that was something helpful to me, and a coping mechanism for when I was in bed. And then perhaps I would rent an audiobook from my library and listen to it. But that was only if I felt like I had enough energy to hear something and hear the stimulus. So there were lots of days where I spent the whole day in bed and needed to maintain some kind of mental health capacity, and it would get very rudimental at times. Rudimentary, sometimes I make up my own words and I like can't tell if I've made it up or if it's a real word at this point. Anyway, that's just part of who I am on this channel at this stage, right? Like, I'm in my living room, so at least I'm not filming from my bed. This is a step in the right direction. I would actually plan in my mind the types of videos that I would want to make to help somebody else when I got better enough that that was maybe something I could do in my life. I've always been decent with like public speaking, and that's never made me feel nervous or anything like that. So I always I made this channel a year ago. I think it was like June 22nd, when I put together this Chronic Matters channel, because I had the idea that I wanted to share my story, and this was the easiest way I thought that I could get it out there. Even though people have suggested, well, write a book, but writing a book has not become one of my coping mechanisms, because it takes too much like mental power. It takes too much hand power, and that just hasn't been my reality as of yet. I used to sew. Sewing was something that I did for pleasure prior to getting the virus and becoming sick. In the last 2-3 weeks, I have started sewing again, which speaks volumes to where I am in my health journey from a year ago today, where primarily everything that I did to entertain myself happened in bed. But I can suggest binaural beats. It works on the different wavelengths in your brain, and it depends on the type of binaural beats that you're trying to listen to. You can get them for anxiety, sleep, all sorts of different genres of binaural beats. Some of them drive me nuts, some of them are okay. But if I was having a migraine, for example, and it was going to be a migraine day, and I wanted to keep my mind from beating itself up, the fact that, you know, I wasn't up with my kids that day, I didn't get to go outside, I couldn't do anything other than lay in the bed and take my PRN medications so that I could get over this migraine. And of course, they all have side effects as well. So binaural beats was something that I would listen to stop my mind from beating itself up for not being what I needed to be for everybody else that day. That's where, depression kind of sinks in. So sometimes you have to speak louder than the voice that's inside of your head saying negative things. And if you've done any therapy for mental health conditions, you will know that combating negative thoughts is, at the forefront of most therapies, but it's actually very, very difficult. It's difficult to step into the middle of a rumination cycle and say, okay, I'm just not going to do this anymore. So sometimes you need something that speaks louder than your brain does to override the negativity that you're allowing to bring you down emotionally. So I would use binaural beats if I absolutely had to be in my room with the blinds drawn, with no stimulus. You can kind of see my friend here. His name is Gus, and he was purchased he was purchased after the toilet paper shortage started in 2020. He was meant to be a service dog that I would personally train myself with a system that a lady who trained service dogs for like 30 years had put together in a book. But then I got sick with, what I got sick with, and he has just done natural training from there forward. So for me, I have been very, very lucky that one of my supports through this has been my animal. He is always by my side. He's trained himself to know when I'm going to have a seizure before I have a seizure. The last time I had a paralysis episode, he didn't move. Like when I came back from the paralysis episode, he was in the exact same position as he was, hours previously when I went into it. So if you happen to be lucky enough to have an animal, talk to your animal. Thank your animal for all that they do for you. I have come to really enjoy writing, and that actually spiraled off into a what's the name of it? Whatever. Anyway, I can't think of the name of it, but I really like fountain pens. And the reason that I picked up fountain pens as opposed to just normal pens and writing on normal paper is the weakness. My hand was so weak that holding onto a pen and putting pressure on the paper so that a rollerball pen would put ink to the paper was too difficult. So we're saying, I had to get creative here about how I could partake in activities to keep my mind from spiraling on me. And so hobby, that's the word I was trying to come up with. Hobby of fountain pens came in because if you knew me in my personal life, I like to customize just about everything. And so being able to customize the ink color and put some sparkle in it and buy proper fountain pen paper, watch videos on fountain pens was a rabbit hole that I was able to go down. And that's one of the things that came out of my chronic illness was this hobby of fountain pens. And it in itself turned into a separate way of healing in which I found out about something that came from Japan, and it's Hobonichi Techo 5-year journal. That's what it is. It's a book that has a spot to write in a blurb from every single day for 5 years. And I wish I had have found out about it like 5 years ago, because it would have caught so many important things in my life. And I could go back and I could see how far I have actually come. And I'm, as difficult as it was to start writing, I started in last year. I got it and started January 1st, or I got it partway through January, and I was able to go back and update it just through other journals that I had written. And I was writing every single day because, again, I could do it from my bed. I'm very blessed to have a bed that will rise up with a button. But I also have a lap desk, so I would suggest that if you have to, if you're bedbound and you're struggling, I would suggest getting a lap desk, just a simple lap desk, something to add stability so that you could write, or you could put your laptop on, or, you know, like put your, even if you had to put it beside you on the bed and you put your phone on it because you don't have a bedside table, or your bedside table won't let you do that or something, and then you can watch YouTube videos to distract yourself. But I don't yet, but I could look back at, you know, everything that happened in the last year and see how far I have come and see the development of everything in my life from this journal. And so that became a really important part of my healing when I couldn't take my healing or my well-being outside of the bedroom, and I had to come up with ideas on how to live, you know, on my bed. And that was the extent. You know, I didn't have any of the mobility aids yet. Mobility aids, let's actually talk about that for a second. For your healing, it could be really difficult to imagine yourself using mobility aids, whether it's a cane or a walker or a wheelchair or an electric wheelchair, whatever the mobility aid is that you might be using. It might be very difficult to mentally wrap your head around that, because there's a lot of stigma, just like having chronic illness, and everyone assumes you're faking it. I don't like to look at it that way, but I do believe that that is the stigma in at least Western society. So what I would say is that it can go a really long way to your well-being if you are able to put aside how you look to other people and go ahead and get the mobility aid. If I know in Canada that AADL is an option, and they'll pay like 75% the cost of certain mobility aids depending on what you need, written by a doctor, like with a doctor's note. In Canada, you can phone for an occupational therapist on your own from the hospital. You don't need your own, like, you don't need a referral from your family physician. You can phone and you can go to outpatient physiotherapy and that sort of thing. There's lots of systems in Canada, but you could be from somewhere else where everything is very different. Myself, I had insurance to primarily cover every bit of mobility aid. And I had a family physician who, if I went to him and said, look, I'm stuck in bed, I can't move. Sitting up, my heart rate is 120. Like, I can't sustain walking outside, but I mean, I'm watching the world fly by every single day, and I can't step foot outside of my house because my body will not physically sustain it. And so, thankfully for me, he obliged and wrote, like, custom manual wheelchair. And the reason it needed to be custom is I had so much deconditioning at that point that the physical act of propelling myself forward is gonna put more work on my heart, and sitting, it's going 120. So, and that's not pushing, that's not holding anything, that's worth no work, no effort whatsoever. And I can only sustain that at that point sitting for maybe 30 minutes. I was lucky if I would sit and be able to write at my desk instead of riding in my bed for 30 minutes. So I needed a customized wheelchair that was light, and the seating on the wheelchair needed to support my sides. So one, if I had a seizure, that I wasn't gonna fall out of the chair, and two, that I didn't have to have as much effort going into sitting. And so he wrote me a prescription for a custom wheelchair, and thankfully, as I'm a registered nurse and so is my husband, we have really good benefits, and I was able to use the entirety of those. But getting in a wheelchair for the first time, as somebody who has not sustained an injury that has overnight taken my walking capacity, having to sit in a wheelchair and see people. I don't live in a particularly large city. I run across people I know all the time. So sitting in a wheelchair and just having them be like, I didn't even recognize you, what happened? And then tell my story again, or somehow give a reason like, well, I've got this cardiac condition. I mean, I can barely sit. Talking raises my heart rate. I'm diaphoretic right now, sitting here trying to explain ways that you can, kind of incorporate living a little bit more into your life when you have a chronic illness. So like, none of that was easy, and I don't want to sit here and pretend that it was, but it was life-changing. And so allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to look a way you don't want to look is going to go a long way to bettering your quality of life. Because the events that you choose, that you want to, like, let's pretend none of us had to work for a living, right? And money wasn't a necessity of life. Outside of that, there's a lot of things that we want to do to be productive citizens in this world. Sitting in bed all day, every day is no quality of life. And, it's not to say that you have no value. I do not want to mix quality of life with value of life. I do not want to mix those two things up. So my perceived quality of life living in my bed was not good. The value of me as a human living in bed with a chronic illness does not change from me sitting here talking to you, from me being at work as a registered nurse, anything. Those two things need to be separate in your mind. And so I want to make darn clear that I am not talking the value of a human, okay? But the quality of your life can significantly go up if you allow yourself to look a certain way to other people, and just big fat do it anyway, okay? I just the other day got a new mobility aid, and it's really funny because I actually have 3 mobility aids that I use to better my mental health. I use an electric wheelchair. It only goes like 5 kilometers an hour at most. I've lost my driver's license because of seizures. So I happen to live in an area that, as long as the weather is good, I have definitely gotten myself stuck on numerous occasions. But as long as the weather is good, I live close enough to like some shops that I could get to on, going 5 kilometers an hour. It's not a big deal. I cannot sustain pushing myself in my wheelchair, even though it's carbon fiber and incredibly light, except for the seating component on it. That's probably the heaviest portion of it because I do have issues with my back, my spine, my pelvis, and all of that. And I did need the heavier back support. But I can't push myself on anything that isn't a flat surface. So if I'm not at a mall or a store that's like flat, that's not the wheelchair that I'm gonna choose. But allowing myself to get outside renewed a lot of my joy in this world. And I have a little pond close to me, and I can pack up my tiny little painting supplies, my tiny little paint, book, and I can take it over there and sit by the pond and watch the birds, right? I can take my 5-year journal over there and write in my 5-year journal. And maybe it's a great day because I got to get outside and breathe the fresh air. Over the winter, that is not at all what my reality was. And I had to get quite creative, even inside of my own home, as to how to not spiral. And I don't want to say that I didn't spiral, because that's also not true. I have good days and I have bad days, and I have really, really bad days, and I have days where I have had a couple days in the last few weeks where I almost felt normal. Not everybody else normal, but like chronic Andrea normal, where I could think about going into my sewing room and doing something that pleases me, because it's what I wanted to do. Now, if you have children and you have chronic illness, you have probably belittled yourself as a parent. I'm right there with you. I grew up in an abusive environment. I'm probably half of the reason I'm predisposed to all of the conditions that I have is I had a really crummy start in this world. And I have 3 children, and they are ranging in age from 13 and a half now to just turned 3. My ring light just died, so it's just going to be darker for the remainder of this video. It just is what it is. Anyway, so to maintain my mental health in terms of being a parent and not telling myself every single day that I'm a terrible parent and that I have no value, because your brain listens to you. It can hear what you're saying. And I do get on those sprees, and I'm so thankful for my husband to help bring me out of them. But one of the things that I have made a priority, even through all my exhaustion, is communicating with my children. So, I might not be able to be at every event that they go to, although I prioritize those activities, and I will pay attention, which is another one of my keys to success with chronic illness, is pay attention to your triggers, so that if you have something that you need to go to, like an event, like my son did volleyball this year, so I wanted to attend as many games as I could while still being very chronically ill and unable to, I couldn't really tolerate sitting, and I had to sit at the games, right? So, it's a day that I'm not booking a doctor's appointment on that same day unless I have to. I'm not going out to lunch or having somebody over on that day. I'm not going to set an alarm. I'm probably not going to shower that day. I'm going to have a goal to shower the night before, so that I set myself up for success for the things that are actually important to me. So one of the things that was important to me is keeping open communication with my children. I mean, if you watched a couple videos ago, you know that basically all 3 of my children watched me be lugged out of the house by 7 full-grown men on a blanket to the hospital, fully paralyzed. That's traumatic for kids. It was traumatic enough for me, let alone my small children watching this happen. So I prioritize speaking to my children basically first out of almost everything in the day. And if that means that I do not have the capacity to shower that day, dry shampoo it is. It all comes down to that. When you have to make the decisions that are that small in a day, for your well-being or for your children's well-being, you need to be a master at prioritizing and knowing what your triggers are. So I prioritize speaking with my children. So, you know, if my son came in, I wanted to find out where he was at and have lighthearted conversations too. Like, and I would let him basically direct the conversation because I wanted it to be whatever was on his mind at that point in time. Same with my daughter, or if it was my toddler, maybe her and I are sitting on the bed with crayons and, you know, coloring, and I'm telling her how happy I am that she came to visit me in bed, how much I appreciate it, you know, what a beautiful picture she did, so that she has happy memories with her mother. You know, like as much as I try to tell myself that I hold no value as a parent, I still hold value as a parent, and my children are being given a blessing in this world to watch me suffer. Deep suffering is a blessing, and it does not always feel that way, but I truly believe that this is a blessing. Imagine if the person, I'm a registered nurse, right? So imagine if the nurse who is seeing you in the emergency room in your worst moment has lived that same moment. And she doesn't come in, and she doesn't ask you to speak faster than you can speak. She doesn't stand above you, she sits beside you. You know, she allows you the time, the space, the energy to tell as much or as little of your story as you need. Those are blessings. That is a blessing that I could give to someone. Sitting here a year out saying, like, you know, there are some days where the whole day was spent in the bed with, you know, sheets drawn and everything like that. You know, you really could easily fall down the I have no value path, but deep, painful suffering is a gift. And if you choose to look at it as a gift that you can give to other people, or that maybe even your children are going to give to other people, because it doesn't necessarily mean, like, some of us are terminal. Some of us aren't going to get better. I have enough conditions that I am not going to get better. I will get better 4 times and I will relapse and I will suffer and I will have deep suffering as part of my life for the long haul of my life. But I have 3 children who have watched me suffer, and I explain to them that this is a blessing for you. It will open your eyes to be a gentler human, to see the human condition, because I was oftentimes faking being well, and I actually can't fake being well anymore. It's too obvious now that I'm unwell. So like, that was a luxury that I had back then, to fake being well, that I no longer have. And so, you know, seeing your illness, even if it's only some of the times, as a blessing, because you cannot live in the happy all the time. You cannot fake it until you make it for absolutely everything. It's unrealistic. You know, you need to be okay with that day, the success of the day being the fact that you showered. So I go into the day with like one goal. And today that one goal is to upload a video to YouTube so that maybe somebody else can stumble across it and feel less alone. And originally, you know, my idea for opening this YouTube video was going to include like all of it. I was going to edit the videos. I was going to make them funny and poignant, and, you know, I was going to edit them, and, you know, it was going to cross multiple platforms. And I have come around to the fact that my ring light's gonna die, and I'm gonna keep talking, and the color is gonna change, and it doesn't matter, and I'm gonna have my hair done some days and not others. And it's just, it's real life. It's real chronic illness. It's real tiny little steps towards the bigger picture. Because if I'm not here tomorrow, but I left, I don't know, 4 hours of conversation, maybe that's what keeps my kids going. Maybe they hear my voice and it makes them smile. I don't know. Maybe you're laying there and you've got a migraine and this is what you're listening to get your brain to stop ruminating and telling you how horrible you are. I don't know. All I know is that my personal goal for today is to upload a YouTube video, and no matter how it comes, it's gonna come. And that is okay, and that is chronic illness, and that is what I want to highlight on this page. So maybe you color a picture, maybe it's a really small picture so you feel like you did well. Maybe you write one journal page, maybe it's typing, maybe it's speaking, maybe you you want to make a goal to get educated on a topic, so you watch a YouTube video on it or you listen to an audiobook on it. Maybe you really want to get out just to see the pond down the street, and you allow yourself to use a mobility aid and you let go of your preconceived notions of how you're supposed to live in this world and how you're supposed to look to the people around you and how you're supposed to justify your life to other people, because it's not about that. It's not about other people. It's about how you interact in this world and how you feel about how you interact in this world. And did you leave something positive? And I think the vast majority of us want to leave something positive. So maybe you're writing notes to your children. Maybe you're writing cards that they'll open up on their 18th birthday, and yeah, you'll still be here for it, but you wrote it, when they were little, and you can combine it with the note that you're giving to them or the card that you're giving to them on their 18th birthday, right? And it can be words that came from the past that hold different values, or maybe you're seeing them when they're little. Whatever it might be, whatever form of healing that you need, at the end of the day, it's about grace. Grace is about allowing yourself to be where you are at the age and stage that you are, doing the best that you can with where you're at today. And if you can know where you need the help and be vulnerable enough to ask for it, you have a spouse, maybe they can, put all the ingredients for a smoothie into the fridge so that when you're ready for the smoothie, you just dump the smoothie into the machine and press start, whatever it might be. I'm not sure how chronic you are. I don't know your mobility limits. I know mine, they're very low. But if you, maybe there is something that you like to do. Maybe you've always wanted to take up a ukulele, I don't know, and then learn how to do that. And maybe you're YouTubing it, and maybe that day you're not even picking up the instrument. You're just watching somebody else teach a lesson on it, but you're getting that much closer so that when you do pick up the instrument, you can maybe take it on. I think there's a lot of things that we want to complete as humans, and part of the gift of being chronically ill is having to live a slow life. And maybe that slow life allows you to develop a portion of yourself that you never knew was there. I'm not a YouTube creator. I just happen to be a person talking and putting a video out. But maybe one day somebody will think, hey, she's a YouTube creator, right? Well, that came from the time and the space and the energy for this particular thing at this particular moment in time. If that means, maybe you can sit for an hour and you've got an app on your phone that teaches you how to play the piano. Maybe it's that. And maybe you only learn one song, or maybe you sing. Maybe you need to have a really long bath and you put something educational on so that you're consuming something good. All I'm saying is that there's lots of tips and tricks that you can employ to try to help your mental state stay above water and not spiral down, and so that you set yourself up for success rather than setting yourself up for failure. If you say and then you have to be okay to change the plans, right? Because I've had the goal to shower for 4 or 5 days in a row and it hasn't happened. And that's my only goal for the day, And so then things change. Well, maybe I wrote in my journal or caught up a couple days in my journal, you know, because it's an everyday thing and sometimes I get behind. And instead of showering, maybe that's what the success from the day was. And you really do have to count those tiny, tiny, tiny steps so that over time, over a long period of time, you can see your steps of improvement and success. And I think at the end of the day, that is where you have to find your value in chronic illness. You have to set your limits where they need to be. Sometimes you need to change your thinking, allow yourself to look a certain way, let go of preconceived notions of who you are, who you're supposed to be, and where you're supposed to be. And I really, really pray for everyone on the other side of this, that they are not being met with hesitation from those that they love, that the people that they love are open to understanding where you're at and believing you, so that you are not fighting yourself as well as fighting family and the people that are around you. And I think that's all for me today. My battery is now low on my phone and I'm gonna upload this video, and I hope it gave you some help and at least maybe one person. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you in another video. Bye.